Hello.
Oh, hey, there you are.
Hey,
Hi, how's it going?
it's going good. It's going good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I've been up since like 4:45 in the morning, but
Oh,
we're just gonna roll it.
oh, okay. All
I
right.
had to, I had to take a friend to the airport, so it's
Oh,
7:30 a.m. flight. So,
uh,
and then I couldn't find my goofy Christmas sweater, so we're breaking from tradition just a little bit, and I'm wearing a normal t-shirt for once.
oh, well, I still have to actually find mine for later today. I
Heck
don't
yeah.
even know where to begin with that search, though.
Wear it to the dentist. Just disturb your dentist.
I was thinking about it. It's actually a Diablo one that I got at BlizzCon, so it's
Nice.
I love it, but I don't know how my dentist will feel about it.
I think Diablo 2 might have been the game I spent more time on than anything else, and I've spent a lot of time on some games.
Loved Diablo 2. That consumed most of my time in middle school. I think the only thing that's taken more time has been World of Warcraft.
Same, although I did get out of World of Warcraft during Burning Crusade, so not quite that, but yeah,
It's a
s-
good time to get out. That's for sure.
for sure, for sure. Um, so Jason, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, yeah. I am an anxious human being. I've, I think I've always been, and I happened to start a World of Warcraft guild that somehow became an international nonprofit. I I still at times try and figure out how all of this could have possibly happened, or even if I was the right person to make something like this happen. But here I am.
Heck yeah, and yeah, that imposter syndrome is pretty fierce. I feel that. So you say that it was started out as like a World of Warcraft guild that turned into an international nonprofit. That process go? What led you from one to the other?
Yeah, yeah. Um, at the time, I was struggling a lot with agoraphobia. I wasn't really able to leave home without having a panic attack. Sometimes even just leaving my room would trigger panic attacks. It had gotten so bad, and yeah, it had been maybe a couple of years that I was struggling with that when I came to the conclusion that I might not want to keep doing this. I wasn't sure if I was ever going to get better. Um, it just didn't seem like it, and it seemed like each day it became worse, and either I was more anxious or more lonely. And World of Warcraft could only fill so much of the void. So, I'd made the decision. I think I'm gonna go through with not being here anymore. And for whatever reason, I just felt really conflicted about the idea of somehow subtracting from the worlds and not adding to it. Um, I don't really understand where it came from, but I just kept thinking that in my head that I somehow had to, um, I guess, justify this, and maybe if I could convince someone to stay, um, that would somehow justify me leaving, and I had just become certain of that. So that's what I set out to do. And I set out to do that in the only world that I felt like I really existed in, and that was the world of Warcraft. Um, and yeah, just you trying to help one person, and then discovered that there were many people who needed help that wanted to talk about these thoughts and these feelings, and it just kept in my mind. It just kept being this thought process of, okay, I guess I'll just keep helping people until there's no one left to help, and then I can go through with it. And yeah, that's not come about. There's a lot of people to help still.
Well, that's a really powerful story, and
Thank you.
it's great that you were able to sort of turn that energy into something positive, for yourself and for others. I was going to ask how's mental illness affected your life. I feel that that kind of is encapsulated, in that story, that, there's this just feeling of being shut in and um, not really feeling like you're able to contribute to the broader world around you. And you found a way to make that work, which leads me actually to the next question after that, which is you're struggling with mental health. What is something that you do that helps you feel better?
Yeah, I still struggle with anxiety from time to time. Definitely, have waves of depression or imposter syndrome that hit me, and having having the clinical expertise now, it doesn't always mean that these things go away, or even I've been in therapy for years now, and sometimes it still just comes back. And what I've noticed has been one of the biggest takeaways from doing a lot of that work is how much easier it is to combat these things when they come back, and just how short lived these kinds of resurgences, or almost like these relapses into those issues, tend to be. And a lot of the times it just begins with identifying it. It begins with being able to notice that pattern. I can look and say, okay, uh, I'm waking up later and later each day. I've noticed that I'm staying up maybe a bit too late playing games and feeling like I'm doing that because I'm like panic trying to de-stress. Like I'm
Right.
revenge playing video games because the day just felt so stressful. Um, and as I notice that and notice that behavior, it becomes a lot easier to remind myself, okay, so we need to maybe check out of work a little bit earlier tomorrow, and need to be really careful about when we wake up and when we go to sleep. Because if we don't stop this pattern, we know exactly where it goes. We know exactly how this could go on for weeks or even months before I catch it and and kind of self correct. And I don't want to go through that. Or even with imposter syndrome, at times I have a tendency to do what's called over preparation. So I always use this example, but never really connected it to myself before. Um, but I wanted to get into streaming, and I wanted to get into content.
Hmm.
And the first thing that came to my mind is, okay, I need to find the best camera. I can't just go live with any camera, because it's a critical part. So I'm going to research what the best camera is. Okay, these are really expensive. Let me research what the best reasonable camera is. And okay, so what are the settings for that camera once I get it? Do I need this Elgato Cam Link in a DSLR, or what about this other thing the Logitech makes? And at some point I'll catch myself and I'll say, okay, we're doing that thing again, where we're over preparing to avoid facing the task at hand because it's stressful. Why are we stressed about this? What are we worried is going to happen? And let's start making some notes on, realistically, how true is it that I need a camera for this? Do I have proof that that is the case? And then I'll log on to Twitch and I'll see a bunch of people streaming their cameras in 480p. And I'm like, okay, so no, probably not, right? And then
Yeah.
tons of streamers who don't even use a camera, or even VTubers, and once I can see that, identify that, I can start to make that change. I can start to work towards slowing down that pattern.
Right. I actually kind of dealt with the same thing going into streaming. I was going to start streaming early in 2017, late 2016. I didn't start. This is my 3-year stream anniversary. So I started at the end of 2018, and it was all over preparation and over analyzing, and analysis paralysis is a lot of it. And I feel like it's a pretty common thing that people with imposter syndrome, with ADHD or anxiety, just do to overcorrect on things. And yeah, I think a lot of people could feel that. But yeah, that's really interesting to sort of catch it through pattern recognition. Like, oh, I'm doing this thing too much. I need to correct. I wonder if maybe people out there might be able to maybe take a lesson from that, because that's something that I definitely think about when I'm in that pattern, but not when I'm not dealing with those emerging patterns. So definitely something to think about. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
oh,
It's to me has become almost like almost like a series of checklists. Like I enjoy sometimes the mechanical nature of it all, because it's just so much easier to notice, to witness sometimes than emotions, which can be so much more complicated. And I can identify patterns in that as well, but you know, it's we're going through some pretty challenging times right now, and seeing a lot. Everything's kind of chaotic, and we have a lot of mixed emotions about the world around us. And so being able to notice the pattern of when some of those things are leading me towards depression or anxiety, it's that pattern that's a lot easier for me to quantify, for me to identify, than it is for me to try and make sense or clarify the emotions first.
right. Um, how has therapy impacted your life?
Oof. You know, uh, I think therapy has, I mean, just completely changed my life. Therapy is, gosh, it's been a way for me to not only identify and point out these patterns so that I can self-correct, but it's given me the tools to actually self-correct. It's given me the mindset, the clarity that I need. Um, I'm able to test out and explore thoughts and feelings, and I guess find a place where so much of that doesn't depend on other people. I guess when I'm thinking about friendships, when I'm thinking about relationships, there's so much there that feels like it can be at stake at times. Um, Communicating with people sometimes can feel risky. Being open, honest with people can sometimes feel risky, and
Right.
therapy is this safe area where you can test all of that, go through and explore all of that before taking it out into the real world and seeing how it is. And regardless of how people respond, regardless of what comes from that, you almost have your own core truth established. So there's some safety in it. If you do face any kind of rejection or confrontation, I think it's been really important as well for having an identity. Um, I think one of the biggest challenges I faced after starting RAD is I didn't feel like I had an identity outside of RAD. Like, this was the only reason that I was alive, and I know that wasn't healthy, but also, I could be introduced to somebody in a personal setting, and I have no idea what to talk about other than RAD. Like, that was just. And once I ran out of explaining what RAD was, it's like, all right, well, see you later. That's me. That's it. Um,
Right.
and I had to really relearn from being in isolation for so long to having my life centered around being of use to others in some way. I had to relearn who I am, what I want, and what's important to me. And yeah, I don't know how I would have done that without therapy. Those are all really deep existential questions that I needed a place to work through those on, and work through them in a way that remained true to me. I think
Right.
that can always be really tough when we get other people's inputs. A lot of times we also get their opinion, and therapy tries to avoid that.
Yeah, definitely. It's a impartial setting that can be
Mm-hmm.
sort of difficult to find with the people around you, for better or worse. Um, when you first sought therapy, did you have any barriers to accessing therapy yourself, whether they be financial, logistical, or even social barriers?
Yeah, yeah, immediately. I remember when I first started to develop the agoraphobia, um, I had gotten to see a psychiatrist who, was identifying what was going on. It was happy to help me start medication, but I don't know if I was ready yet. It was kind of afraid of starting the medication, and I wasn't comfortable taking it the first time it was offered, and I needed to have follow up sessions with them to better understand this medication and what this was going to do. Um, but I just flat out couldn't afford it.
Right.
Seeing them once was almost $300, and it was going to be about half that every time I went, and there were many more sessions to go. Um, and we weren't even talking about therapy; we were just talking about the medication side.
Right.
So there was just no way. I remember asking my mom if there was anything that she could do to help, and I mean, she told me the same thing: like, we can't afford this. So that's pretty much it. And so it just got worse and worse over time, and to the point of not being able to leave home. And this wasn't at a time where telehealth was very common. So not being able to go and see somebody, even once I got on disability and had access to insurance, it didn't really matter all that much. Um, so yeah, I was really stuck. Even as I started to get better over time, and was helping more people and watching this grow, it took me a considerable amount of time to find a therapist that I could actually afford. And um, then then the barrier was actually getting to them. And I
Right.
just was so fortunate that this therapist's office was on my very same block. I just had to walk several houses down, and there was a small business complex on the street, and they were in it. And that even that was super challenging. I remember walking down the street, holding my mom's hand, panicking, going to their office for the first time, and then going in, and they're just like, "Oh boy." so so this is what we're starting with. All right, well, let's get into it.
Right.
Uh, it took a long time, but we got there.
That's good. It's interesting. I think that I mean, at least where I'm at, uh virtual therapy sessions were like not even a thing until COVID started. But like I think that might have been like a technological barrier, which I didn't even think of at the time, that that wasn't even a possibility for a first step for you, or that might have been an easier transition to therapy than showing up to an intake with a new person. But it's yeah, it's now it's everything's online, of course, but like the sort of shifting landscape of what therapy looks like is, been such a big thing to navigate as well. Um, I want to ask you a couple issues, questions about rise above the disorder, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
First off, how does rise above the disorder help people secure funding for therapy?
Fundraising, yeah. All fundraising. I would say a little over 80% of the donations that we bring in to cover therapy come from fundraisers on Twitch. It's really become the core of our ability to do the work that we do. Thankfully, we have some support from Electronic Arts. We have some support from Jagex, the makers of RuneScape, and we'll find various levels of support throughout the industry. But year after year, everything pretty much comes from Twitch.
Right. Follow up to that, I gotten a little bit of wires crossed. I mean, like, if somebody is in search of therapy, how does money get from Rise Above the Disorder to their therapist? Like, how does
Gotcha.
somebody navigate that process?
Sure. So this all begins with seeing a social worker at RAD. That all happens virtually. So somebody will connect with one of our social workers after filling out a form. And, during that conversation, we're talking about how you're feeling, what you're going through, how long you've been going through this, very much what you would expect from any kind of intake. And we'll use that information to help find the right therapist. Once we've found the right therapist for somebody, it's as simple as sending that money to the therapist on that person's behalf. So this therapist has agreed to work with us, understands, that we're going to be there and be a part of this. Occasionally check in, and we tend to let that relationship go and be its own thing. So the therapist doesn't feel like we're getting in the way. It doesn't feel like an extra step, but we are, there from time to time to just make sure that things are continuing to go well, or maybe we've done as much as we can with this therapist. It's time to look at another therapist.
Right.
We definitely want to make sure that we're present when helpful and otherwise not in the way.
Okay. So that's cool. Kind of like a match.com for therapy, something like that.
Yeah, it is a lot like finding a friend or a romantic partner. Finding the right therapist. There's so many different components to it, different pieces to it, but there's also the challenge of even beginning that, dealing with sometimes even the rejection.
Right.
Um, when you're really going through it with depression or anxiety, or ADHD, it's a lot to handle. You're calling potentially dozens of therapists, leaving voicemails, sending, the emails out, and waiting to hear back, and keeping track of all of these things. And then, a lot of the times, by the time you finally hear someone, you just want to get started already. And that might
Yeah.
not be the person to get started with, but you just want it to begin. So if we can handle all of that on someone's behalf, it makes it so much easier. And then we handle the payment side if needed, and now there's no barrier anymore.
That's great. And yeah, the rejection is definitely a huge issue. I took a mental health leave uh early last year, right around the time that COVID started, in order to seek a therapist, and it took me a year to find somebody who was on my island. And it was so much like I ran through the list, and then I ran through the list again, and then I ran through the list a third time, and in the span of time that like all of this happened, that person had set up an entirely new private practice with somebody that I had was a coworker of in the elementary and middle schools, and just so happened to know me. And even though he was already fully like set up some extra time on Friday evenings, so like it took me a year to like find anybody, and that isn't even saying that he's the right person necessarily. Just finding a therapist was a year-long process that would accept me. So
Mm.
it's yeah, definitely helping overcome that rejection hurdle is a huge issue as well.
Oh yeah, that's. I mean, and I faced that. Even in my own searches, it was even more than just finding a therapist that I could actually physically go and see. It's still hard to find somebody that actually made sense, that I felt like I could connect with, that seemed like a good fit. And it just becomes increasingly limited. Well, to actually go through with that, to continue with that, becomes even more limited, I suppose.
Right. Um, so the need for mental health services is definitely skyrocketed over the course of the last few years, due in large part to the COVID pandemic. Um, how does Rise Above the Disorder choose candidates to provide support to if the need is larger than if the demand is larger than the supply?
Yeah, that's been a real challenge. I think it's always been a challenge for us doing the triaging, because there is a huge demand. There was before COVID. There's even more so now, and a lot of the ways that we approach this is a mix of, looking at where someone is presently, and the severity of what they're going through. In addition to assessing the likelihood that they'll really stick with the program. Sometimes we connect with people, we're excited to be working with them, and they discover that they're just not in the space where they're ready yet.
Right.
They need some more time, and that's really hard. That exhausts a lot of time, and so we try our best to really look at that beforehand and put that into part of the triage. And then to some degree, it also comes up to the team, where our team feels like they most connect with somebody. If they have any kind of personal experience with what someone is going through, that starts to come up in priority for them. And I love when we can do that, because it's important for our team to stay really connected, to feel like they're not just facing an endless wave of people needing help, but feel like they have some choice, some level of say, some level of control in the influx. It just makes all the difference when you feel like you have some kind of say in this process. So that tends to be the case. There's also kind of a middle ground of the triage process, where I tend to prioritize people who are at risk for kind of falling further into difficulty. So maybe somebody that is in a place where they're potentially going to drop out of school. Um,
Right.
I usually want to move that person way up, because that singular choice can have a huge impact that's hard to come back from.
Right. Or just
Looking at
risk-taking behaviors in any sort of capacity.
exactly, yeah, somebody who maybe is not experiencing homelessness but is close. I think that can be a huge one for us as well.
Right.
Wanting to make sure that we can avoid that by any means possible. If therapy helps them continue to work and stay working, that's a huge thing, because it's very hard to get out of that cycle once you're in it. So we usually assess that in triage as well.
Okay. Um, in addition to the bottlenecking of demand, what are some other barriers to access to services that people may encounter, and how does RAD help navigate these barriers?
Insurance. Insurance is, holy moly. Insurance, it can be an absolute nightmare. And it is a lot of the times prohibitive. And if you are on some kind of Medicaid plan in California, it's Medi-Cal, and each state has its own naming of it. But Medicaid or state-funded healthcare is hit or miss, and depending on the provider that it is through, or the managed provider that it is through, it makes all the difference. You might be in a place where Medicaid is managed by Kaiser, but Kaiser isn't well established there, and
Hmm.
now that is your problem. And it's just Kaiser doesn't care. Kaiser's wants to take that money, so Kaiser will, and you're stuck with the lack of providers that Kaiser has in any area. And that can apply to any of them. There's smaller ones that are fighting for attention and funding, and they might have some pluses, but their network are even smaller, and so now you're stuck with even less access. Um, it's stuff like that. A lot of the times the only solution we end up with is, yeah, we're just going to find somebody off insurance and pay them out of pocket on your behalf because it's just not worth dealing with the insurance. Some insurance providers will even debate these or contest these. They'll want you to get an official diagnosis, and then they'll say that that diagnosis is wrong, and they want you to see their provider to confirm it. And their provider is like a third
Um,
party audit provider, and it's like,
right.
I don't want to jump through hoops. I'm depressed. You
Yeah.
don't. I don't need somebody to confirm that officially. Like I can tell you that from experience. Um, those kinds of hassles, it's just not. It's not worth dealing with. Beyond that, cultural, because
Yeah.
we're in so many different countries. There are plenty of these kinds of barriers that can get in the way, whether it's socially acceptable for you or you could be removed from your family. Um, there are many countries where it's not necessarily seen as a necessarily like a weakness, but is seen as a reflection of your parents, and bringing shame to your parents would be unacceptable.
Right.
It's like saying your parents did a bad job raising you, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to hurt them in that way. And overcoming things like that is hard. Having those conversations and really working through how they can have that conversation with their family as well. It's a lot of coaching through that, and it's a lot of not wanting to overstep the cultural side, but
Right.
also wanting to make sure somebody gets help.
So
So,
that actually kind of brings me to my next question. Some groups face a higher than average need for mental health, such as queer folks facing discrimination or hostile living environments, or higher barriers to effective therapy, such as finding culturally competent therapists for people of color or racial and religious minorities. What does RAD do to help provide equitable access for these groups, or what can it do in these sorts of situations?
yeah. I think we're really fortunate in the sense that being based in California, being based out of Los Angeles, so many of the things that are really foreign in many other states or even in many other countries, that's just not foreign here.
Mm,
Growing up in Long Beach is incredibly diverse. This is a hub for the gay rights movement very, very early on. Um, our mayor is a gay Latino who has dubbed City Hall Kitty Hall because he has a ton of cats and they roam City Hall. So we, have that kind of basic framework for acceptance and seeing people and being able to an idea of what normal is. I think that ends up being a problem a lot of times is the term normal and what it means based on where you live. And if where you live, you expect to see just one type of person all the same, it just, that's tough. And it is especially tough if you don't identify with that, but everybody else
right.
around you does.
Right.
When you come from that mindset, it can be very, very hard. But again, thankfully, it is not the case here. And so, what we're able to often do is very quickly look into other hubs that are similar to our own. So, if I'm finding somebody a therapist in Texas, especially now that things are remote, I'm oftentimes going to look at Dallas, Austin, I'm going to look for other hubs where there is diversity, where there are people who have all types of identity and feel represented or can safely be represented. And for the most part, want to make sure that the person you connect with shares a similar identity so that it continues to become something that you can normalize and not feel so, different, feel so conflicted on what norm is where you live. You'll start to connect with more people where that's different. It's not always the easy thing to do, especially throughout the South in the US and through the Midwest. And a lot of the countries that we work in, sometimes these things are wildly unacceptable or potentially even death sentences. If you don't identify with the mainstream, you're at risk. Being very delicate and sensitive at those times and trying to figure out the logistics without potentially ousting somebody or putting them in danger. It's a tough one. We had somebody in Pakistan years back that was an atheist,
Right.
and where they lived in Pakistan still had religious police. You could be
Hmm.
reported for being an atheist, and it is a death sentence. Um, much, they'd be isolated out of their family and so many other things that they were more concerned about than death. But going through and finding a therapist, it was a lot of playing spy. It was like talking with the therapist, and okay, I like this therapist. So, what do you think about God? What do you think about people who don't believe in God? Would you report such a person? And just trying to go through and assess that.
Right.
I have to do that a lot. Um, and not every therapist, just because somebody is a therapist doesn't mean that they understand. It doesn't mean that they're always empathetic. There are definitely some therapists who have bias. There are definitely some therapists who, still, at least in the US, still have a very conservative Christian mindset and even practice from that perspective. We
Hmm.
have to really go through and have those conversations and make sure that the person that we're speaking to is going to provide a safe environment and ideally has a personal experience similar to the person that we're helping. If they've also gone through their own transition, if they have also, come out to family and felt rejection, those are things that I want to incorporate because now this person is speaking from a very different place. And the person they're talking to doesn't feel as alone in that experience anymore. They see somebody who went through it, who made it through it, is still here. I think those are really important things to do. And as much as we always want to, you know, be that person, equally important for us to acknowledge when we're not that person, but, can find that person for them.
Right. Um, Mental health is complex and highly individual. There's almost never one solution to a person's mental health issues. What are some ways you recommend for people to nurture their mental health outside of or even in addition to therapy?
Ooh, yeah. Sleep. Man, sleep is everything.
Oh yeah.
Um, the more and more we learn about sleep, the more we start to, continue to see it as the basis for so much. Um, the difference between a day where I'm gonna have a panic attack and a day where I'm chilling as long as I'm in my room. Um, a lot of the times that's sleep.
Yeah.
It's so critical being able to get that time, and it's not an easy thing to do. There's a lot of anxiety around falling asleep for many people. There's times where the anxiety, exists even while you're asleep, and so you wake up suddenly after just a few hours and struggle to stay asleep. These things make it very, very difficult, and so getting that under control, whether that is, through practicing your sleep habits disconnecting from everything hours before going to sleep, really pushing ourselves to try and fall back asleep, not turning on the TV or anything, when we wake up. It's hard. It takes a lot of time, but it's 100% worth the effort. What can make that even easier is controlling diet. Caffeine, soda, coffee, all these things, lots of sugar, all going to mess with our sleep, all going to impact our mental health on their own, but make it even harder for us to get control of sleep. We definitely want to manage that. And meditation. Um, Meditation is so ridiculously powerful. I think there is a lot of challenges with meditation right now where it's become almost so mainstream that it feels like there's no way that it could be real or it could work as well as it seems. Um, and, as somebody who's struggled with ADHD my whole life, meditation felt like, yeah, if I could sit and do that, I would definitely do that. I can't do that with the,
Yeah,
it's just sucks to even suggest. But
right.
it, it's wild that over the years, I've been able to do that and even meditate as a means to kind of control my level of focus, control my attention, prolong attention span. There's so much there. Even as psychedelics are starting to potentially be the new wave of medications. One of my good friends is a researcher at MAPS, pretty much the leaders in understanding the applications of psychedelics to mental health. One of the things that he had shared with me is that there's really nothing that that meditation can't do. Um, it's really it's you could substitute all of these medications with meditation if you were to become a strict practitioner of it. It's that powerful. So
Right.
I definitely encourage people to really begin that and to set time aside, even if it's just a minute or two, to get into the habit of really clearing our mind, trying to clear our thoughts, and being with ourselves.
God, I wish
It's
I could sit still for a minute.
yeah, yeah. It's it took me forever, and I hated every time it came up in therapy because it always felt like cool, like you're telling me this, but this feels just as inaccessible as it felt when I was trying to afford therapy previously. It just wasn't gonna happen. Um, but there were so many different breakthroughs that I had with meditation. Starting with being able to sit still for just a few seconds and really making the time every day to keep ramping that up. It was like somebody telling me, like, yeah, you just need to be able to bench press 500 pounds. And yeah, if I were to start
Let's
with
live for it, bro.
500 pounds, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just like, get good, bro. Like, what are you doing? Like, no,
Get
I
good.
can't. I literally cannot do this. But if I were to start with 10 pounds and work my way up, that is a very different approach altogether. It is feasibly possible for me to, at some point in time, get to that. Just like with meditation, I was able to get towards these minutes at a time of just completely being present, no thoughts. Um, it took years, but it's to the point where, yeah, I can really meditate and shift my mindset entirely. I can really pull myself out of depression, not just in the behavioral patterns, but even the mindset through meditation.
I'd like to open the field to any questions if there are any viewers that have any questions out there, but I'd also like to just thank you for coming on. I have one more question on my own. That's that if you could say one thing to people watching this who are struggling with their mental health right now, what would it be?
Hmm. One thing. Yeah, I think about that all the time. Like, what would I say even to myself? years ago when I felt like I couldn't leave home. Because if I had said, "Hey, it's going to get better," I would have, I that wouldn't mean anything. It How could it get better? How could it possibly? How would it even be worth going through this longer for it to ever get better? It never feels like that when you're going through it. Um, or even, you just got to start therapy and trust that. I wasn't in the mindset to do that. Um, and I think to some degree, so much of me was waiting for that time when it would feel right, for this time that I would be ready, that I could totally do it. Things would align. It would just happen. Um, but that never really came about. Um, and so I get conflicted on, would I tell myself to just do it, or would I even listen to that?
Right.
Would I listen to anything when I'm in that mind space? And I think what I've come to the conclusion of is, if you're aware that you're going through those issues right now, if you're aware you're struggling with depression, anxiety, and you usually are aware to some degree that that's what you're experiencing, I think it's important to look at all of the thoughts that come from that and identify them as a part of it, and identify that as something that you can choose to associate with as part of your identity, or not. You can get to a place where you can make that choice. But um, the thoughts that I would have about not wanting to be here, it didn't seem like it was part of depression. It just seemed like the logical approach. Didn't think I was going to get better. This just made sense. And
I
I had
feel that one.
no I just had no way to look at it objectively and think, no, this thought comes from depression. If I was not depressed, I would not think this way.
Right.
And that's
I
so hard to see.
It is. I know I was depressed for years before I was ever diagnosed with depression because I would just go like, "Of course I'm depressed. Life sucks. Who wouldn't be depressed?" And it's really hard to recognize that thought, especially when it's just the thought you've always had, you know?
Yeah, yeah. That is such a strange thing to look at in retrospect, that this is a mindset that comes from the depression.
Yeah.
And right now, it can be so hard to see outside of that because it's all you know. It's what you're experiencing. It's hard to think outside of that. But the future, what life is like without that, outside of that, is so different.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth taking the chance to find out, and to really work through what we're feeling, to try therapy, to try some of these things even outside of therapy to heal, and trust that the the thoughts that are pushing you away from doing that, the thoughts that are fearful of that, the thoughts that revolve around I don't deserve this, or it's not possible, these all come from that depression, that anxiety, and won't won't need to be here if we work on it.
Thank you very much, Jason. Does anyone out there have any questions that they want to ask? You guys got a couple minutes to prep them if anyone has any. I'll give you just a minute grace time, and I just want to say again, thank you so much for being a part of this, for being rad, and for all of the good work that you do, and to Caffeine as well, if you're still there. Just thank you both so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
I don't see any questions, so I think I will let you go on that note. Um, I maybe if anyone has any like pressing questions about how to reach y'all, if anyone out there wants to seek services after seeing this, um, what's a good way for them to find you?
Um, increasingly on Twitter, just my name, Jason Docton. I definitely encourage people to ping me on Twitter because I'm trying to use it more and need people to push me to.
Okay, good. I just put that Twitter in chat if anyone is reading this and wants to reach out to you. And then also the website urad dot yeah urad.org, right?
Mhm.
Perfect. Got both of those in chat. If anyone needs to reach out to Jason or anyone else from the RAD organization, thank you so much. I will let you go because I know that you got to get to your dentist appointment soon.
Thank you.
Oh, actually, I do got a question. Ricky asks. Oh, I want to segue for this a little bit. So Ricky donated $50 during our
Oh,
interview and said, "I know nothing of the U.S. health system, but it sounds like you're fighting the good fight. All the best." And then just asked in chat. I don't know if this is already covered, but do you operate only within the U.S. or on a more global scale? And I'll let you. I know I can say right away just from doing a little bit of background research on the site. Rise Above the Disorder has helped 38,000 people across 133 different countries get access to services. But I'll let you talk a little bit about the scope, about the degree of like domestic versus international access.
yeah, yeah. I mean, thank you so much for the support, Ricky. And yes, we do operate everywhere in the world. We've been in about 133 countries now. And there's not any particular limit to that. That's simply where people found us and reached out for support. So, yeah, anywhere. When we work in areas that do have universal health care, a lot of the times it's just helping to find the right therapist and making sure that we can kind of offload that work from them, or even being able to help people work around the queues, since sometimes there can be month long or even year long waits to access certain resources in mental health care, and it usually is just down to the system itself, maybe not being able to have the bandwidth to look more closely and see who's available and who's not. So, maybe we'll be working in Canada where somebody's been told it'll be a couple of months until they can see a psychiatrist, but we'll take a look and we'll find somebody who's ready to see them next week. So it's yeah, sometimes it just helps that we're able to become a little bit more granular than the typical resources can get.
I actually have a follow-up question to that. Suppose somebody from 134th country were to contact you tomorrow. Just 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 as a theoretical. What
Mm-hmm.
does uh, reaching out and helping someone find access to services in an entirely new location look like as opposed to treading in familiar waters?
So, a lot of the times it looks like, initially researching cultural competency, it looks like getting a good grasp of what the healthcare system is like there. And then, a lot of the search remains the same. Once we get a good idea of what we're working with system wise, then we can start to really get into finding the right therapist, and a lot of those metrics really remain the same. Um, Making sure that they have the correct specialties, the correct experience, that they, don't have any strikes against them or on their record, that, when we talk with them over the phone or over a video call, that, they encompass a lot of the right foundations of a good therapist, that they complement your personality based on, the call we had with you, getting to know you. All of that stuff really remains the same. And usually the challenge is going to come from general regions. So, If you're coming from a country throughout most of North Africa, a lot of the difficulty is going to be in the lack of infrastructure for healthcare that exists there, much less mental health care.
Right.
So, working through that usually becomes the major challenge, but it doesn't it's not too dissimilar to another country we might have worked with in that region, and usually we'll have some level of experience like that since
Okay.
we've been in every region.
So you go from regional similarities into local differences, basically.
Yeah, and usually those local differences aren't gigantic for it to be starting from scratch at this point.
Right. More like finding a new therapist. So the basic logistics at that point.
Hmm.
Cool. That's a really wouldn't have thought to ask that, but that's a cool thing to know. Um, okay. I think I actually have to let you go at this point. We've actually been talking for almost an hour now, and we're running a little over time. But I want to say again, thank you so much for conducting this interview with me. I know this is the season you probably have a very busy month working with other live streamers and everything like that. So it means a whole lot to me that you were willing to do this interview with me. Again, shout outs to Jason Docton. You can find him at twitter.com/Jason Docton, and you can also find the organization Rise Above the Disorder at urad.org. Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Have a great day, and I hope your teeth are cavity free.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take it easy.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Stay rad.
You too.
All right. That was Jason Docton from Rise Above the Disorder, urad.org. That's who this whole thing is for. Well, not him specifically, but his organization is who this whole thing is for. If you feel like compelled to donate, I highly recommend donating to. You can use this Tiltify link right there, and let's try and get that number from 50 to 500 by the end of the day. We got 12 hours to do it. All right, let's go.